Welcome to today's Explainer. Imagine stepping into a time machine and traveling back to 19th century Japan. It's a world echoing with the clash of steel, ruled by fierce samurai and incredibly strict traditions. But today, we're looking at a completely unlikely mastermind who fundamentally changed the course of this entire nation. Our hero isn't a legendary swordsman, and he isn't some powerful, wealthy lord. Instead, he fought his battles not with a sword, but on an abacus, essentially an early calculator. This is the story of Omura Masujiro, the hidden disruptor who literally dragged Japan into the modern era.
Okay, let's dive into this, because honestly, it sounds like the plot of a movie, right? On one side, you've got fierce, highly trained warriors who have dedicated their entire lives to the art of the blade. And on the other side, you have a socially awkward medical doctor from the countryside who would much rather read a textbook than swing a sword. Yet this unassuming nerdy doctor somehow managed to outsmart and completely dismantle the greatest fighting force in the country. How on earth did that happen? Well, to answer that, we have to start at the dramatic climax of his entire career.
Picture this. It's Tokyo. The year is 1868. The city is completely engulfed in the UN War, which was this massive civil clash between the old traditionalists and a brand new modernizing government. A terrifying faction of elite, die-hard traditional samurai, known as the Shogunate, have heavily fortified themselves inside a massive temple complex. The new government forces are in an absolute panic. These samurai are just too strong, and everyone knows a drawn-out city battle would cause massive civilian casualties. The atmosphere is thick with dread. And then, stepping onto this chaotic, terrifying battlefield, comes our protagonist. He's a man in simple clothes, famously noticeable for his incredibly large head and wide forehead. He doesn't look anything like a military general, but the government has put him in charge.
He looks at this terrifying samurai fortress, and you know what? He doesn't feel fear. He literally just sees a math problem. Using pure logic, geometry, and a cutting-edge piece of imported Western technology called the Armstrong cannon, he precisely calculates the firing trajectories from a safe distance. He doesn't send men charging in with swords, he just drops artillery right on the samurais' heads. In a single day, just 24 hours, this massive, supposedly impossible siege is completely crushed, with minimal civilian casualties. The elite samurai are defeated by pure, cold mathematics. But who exactly is this quirky military genius?
Chapter 1. The Awkward Village Doctor.
Let's rewind a bit. He was born in 1824 in a rural farming village in what is now Yamaguchi Prefecture. At the time, his name was Murata Zorowo, though history would remember him as Omura Masujiro. And his beginnings were completely unheroic. He was a low-status village doctor, which meant he was absolutely not part of the elite samurai class. Plus, he stood out, but kind of for the wrong reasons. He had an unusually large head and a very prominent forehead. Because of his intense, peculiar look, people mockingly nicknamed him the fire-blowing Daruma, basically comparing him to one of those traditional round Japanese dolls, but with a notoriously short temper. On top of that, he was famously unpopular because he was horribly socially awkward. We're talking zero capacity for small talk, and a guy who never ever gave a fake smile. To perfectly illustrate his extreme bluntness and incredibly logic-driven brain, there's this famous historical anecdote. One day, a patient comes into his clinic, sweating profusely, and tries to make some polite small talk, saying, "Oh, it's so hot today, isn't it?" Omura just stares at him with a deadpan expression and replies, "Summer is supposed to be hot." And that's it. End of conversation. He just didn't compute human emotion the way others did. His brain was wired entirely for facts and logic.
Finding village life incredibly boring, he packed up his things and moved to Osaka to attend the Teki Juku Academy. Now you could think of this place as a 19th century Silicon Valley incubator, but for brilliant historical nerds. It was a place where students gathered to feverishly study Dutch texts, which were literally the only window Japan had into Western science, medicine, and engineering at the time. Here, Omura finally found his true calling. He didn't care about his poor social skills anymore, he just studied day and night. And through sheer intellectual firepower, this unpopular village doctor eventually rose to become the head of the entire elite academy.
Chapter 2. Building the Impossible Ship. So, fast forward to 1853. Heavily armed American warships arrive in Japan, plunging the entire country into an absolute panic.
A powerful local lord realizes they need modern technology and they need it fast. So he hires Omura and essentially says, build us a steamship. Now, keep in mind, Omura was a medical doctor. He had never even seen a steamship in his entire life. But he didn't panic. He just grabbed a Dutch engineering manual, translated the text, figured out the physics and mechanics entirely from the diagrams, and worked with local craftsmen. Astonishingly, he successfully constructed the first Japanese-built Western-style steamship. He built a highly advanced naval vessel purely by reading a foreign manual. That is absolutely wild.
Now, what's really interesting is his reaction. When they finally put the ship in the water and fired up the engine, the local lord and all the officials were absolutely amazed. They couldn't believe it was actually chugging along. The lord eagerly turns to Omura, expecting him to be jumping with joy. Instead, Omura delivers this robotic, totally emotionless response. I built it to move, so it moves. To him, it wasn't magic and it wasn't a miracle. It was just applied science. If the math is right, the result is guaranteed.
Chapter 3: Farmers versus Samurai.
To really understand how radical Omura was, we have to define the world he lived in. For centuries, Japan was ruled by a very strict class system. At the very top were the samurai, making up only about 5% of the entire population. They were the elite ruling class, and historically, they held the exclusive right to bear arms and fight in wars. Farmers were expected to farm, merchants to sell, and samurai to fight. That was the unbreakable rule of society. And it was exactly what Omura was about to destroy.
Omura had been recruited by the Choshu domain, a rebellious province, to reform their military. He looked at the traditional samurai and quickly realized their swords and old-school tactics were utterly useless against modern Western threats. And this brilliantly illustrates his next move. He introduced a radical, highly controversial idea: arming regular commoners like farmers and shopkeepers. While the old armies relied on elite samurai with swords and an exclusive status, Omura built a militia of everyday people. He armed them with highly accurate imported Minié rifles and trained them in mathematical Western strategy.
This radical new army was put to the ultimate test in 1866. The old military dictatorship, known as the Shogunate, sent a massive, traditional samurai army to crush the rebellion. Let these insane odds sink in for a second. Omura's forces numbered around 5,000 men. The Shogunate army marching against them, 150,000 strong. It was 30 to 1. By all traditional logic, Omura and his farmers were about to be completely annihilated.
But tradition doesn't win modern wars. In an epic David versus Goliath victory, Omura's ragtag militia utterly decimated the massive Shogunate army. He didn't rely on the muscle of brave warriors charging into battle. He relied on math. He calculated supply lines, troop movements, and the exact firing range of his superior rifles. His farmers, carefully positioned and following strict tactical orders, shot the elite samurai from afar before they could even draw their swords. Strategy over swords. It was a humiliating defeat for the old regime, proving once and for all that an educated commoner with a gun was vastly stronger than a samurai with a sword.
Let's move to his career trajectory and see how this builds, because the speed of his rise is just absurd. In 1850, he's a nobody, an unpopular village doctor with notoriously bad social skills. Just 5 years later, in 1855, he builds a literal steamship from a book. By 1866, he masterminds a massive military victory against the National Army, and by 1868, as we saw at the very beginning, he takes command of the Uno War and ends it in a single day. In less than 2 decades, the awkward outcast had become the supreme military commander of the new Meiji government.
Epilogue: The Architect's Price.
As a leader in the new government, Omura drafted the ultimate disruption, a national conscription system. He pushed to completely abolish all samurai privileges, arguing that a modern nation needed an army drawn from all citizens, regardless of their birth class. Now, this was absolutely crucial for modernization, but it meant erasing the very identity of the samurai. Unsurprisingly, this enraged the traditional conservative class. He was stripping away the pride, status, and livelihoods of the very warriors who had historically ruled Japan for centuries.
He made incredibly dangerous enemies. In 1869, at the age of just 45, Omura Masujiro was attacked and assassinated by a group of traditionalists, the very same samurai class he had logically and systematically rendered obsolete. He had successfully dragged Japanese society into the modern era using intellect rather than emotion, but he paid the ultimate price for his disruption, succumbing to the wounds from the attack.
He didn't live to see the modern, industrialized Japan that his reforms helped create. However, his legacy was firmly cemented. Today, a towering bronze statue of Omura Masujiro, which, by the way, is actually Japan's first ever Western-style bronze statue, stands high up in the Yasukuni Shrine, a major memorial in Tokyo. He is remembered as the father of the modern Japanese army, a man whose relentless pursuit of knowledge changed the destiny of an entire country.
So, as we look back at the life of this awkward, big-headed doctor who overthrew an empire of swordsmen with an abacus and a book, it leaves us with a provocative thought. In a rapidly changing world, are our greatest weapons our traditions and our muscle, or are they our knowledge, our logic, and our sheer ability to adapt? Keep that in mind the next time you face an impossible challenge. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.